Hello, everyone. I wanted to thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. For those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Anna Treleris, and I'm the Assistant Director of Bentley's Graduate Career Development Center. And before we jump straight into things, I do want to acknowledge everything that is going on in the world around us today. You know, between COVID-19 continuing to challenge our everyday lives and the ongoing protests supporting the Black Lives Matter movement. I just wanted to remind you all that we, as a center, are here for support. If you need someone to talk to, we care about you and we want you to know that we are available to you, especially in times of need like now. And before I introduce our speaker who is here with us today, I just wanted to cover some of the ins and outs of the Zoom webinar and some of the ground rules. So this meeting is being recorded, and both your videos will be shut off and your mics will be muted throughout the entirety of the webinar, and they should be kept as so. We will be collecting questions through the Q&A function throughout the presentation, and we have carved out some time at the end of the presentation to address them. So please remember to be sure to submit your questions via the Q&A feature. And if you see a question that you really like, make sure to upvote the question so that it actually gets multiple votes and ends up at the top, because we will answer the top questions first. Okay. So a little introduction for our guest speaker. Our guest speaker today is not only an advocate of Bentley University, having participated in many of our networking and workshop events, but he is also an alum of the school, having received his Master of Science in Computer Information Systems degree, and has been an adjunct professor to the school since 2016, teaching IT project management and data and information management. He has worked in high-level tech roles at renowned companies like Epsilon, Avid Technology, and Athena Health. His last position was Senior Director of Information Technology at Amazon Robotics, and currently he is the Chief Information Officer at Boston Dynamics. So without further ado, I wanted to introduce Chad Wright. Hello, Chad.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Good morning, good evening, depending on where you are. Thank you so much for joining us. Anna, thank you so much for that kind introduction. Very, very much appreciative.
Absolutely, we're happy to have you here. And at this time, I'm going to stop my video and give you the stage.
All right, excellent. Thank you. Good day, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Happy that we can find a way to get together at this time. I've normally done these presentations, standing in a room full of you, and really like engaging with everyone. So please ask questions. Please use Anna as a way to escalate those questions to me. And again, we'll take as much time as I can to help answer those questions as we go through the presentation today. As Anna said, I'll build the slide real quick. She basically covered all of the things here, but what I like to try to do is give you an understanding of my background and sort of how I've gotten to where I am today. It wasn't too long ago, it doesn't feel that long ago anyways, that I was likely in your shoes, sort of looking for that first big break, that first opportunity, as I was coming out of undergraduate or graduate school. And so I like to share a little bit about that process to help you maybe put some perspective around the questions and challenges that you have. And again, certainly happy to answer any of this in any great detail to you. I came out of a liberal arts college with a degree in math and what was called a concentration in computer science. I had no idea what information technology was. The technology that I use today, the job that I have today, I didn't even know existed when I was, coming out of school. And so I find that to be a compelling reason for me to, to sort of give back and help people understand, what types of opportunities exist in information technology. And that's, again, what my hope comes out of today. If you can learn, one or two things maybe that help you prepare for your next interview, that maybe help you from a career perspective, again, take that away from our conversation today, or, find me on LinkedIn and be happy to have a conversation with you as well. Always look for ways to help out fellow Falcons, and again, so appreciative of the opportunity here. As Anna said, mentioned some of the companies that I've worked with. I've been always here in the Boston market my entire career, worked up from a business analyst type role, systems analyst, application specialist were some of the early titles that I had, but started managing people very, very early. And so I had to make some decisions around the time of going back to graduate school. And I went back twice. I got a master's in computer information systems from Bentley University many years ago, and then went back for an MBA at a time when internet education was still questionable in the early 2000s, and got a master's degree in business administration from UMass Lowell. And I was trying to think, do I want to be a practitioner? Do I want to be more of a manager? And that was sort of why I made that decision going towards the MBA. And I think it's helped serve me quite well. So for those of you that maybe are on the fence between sort of technology and management, there is a good way to balance those things in your career. And again, wanted to just try to add some perspective if you may be sort of facing the same types of challenges in your career. But as Anna said, I joined Boston Dynamics in December, actually. It's my first opportunity to be Chief Information Officer at a company, and having an absolute ball. At the time of my life, it's a dream job for me. I would have told you that I had a dream job when I was at Amazon as well. Loved the 6 years that I spent there. But Boston Dynamics is a unique opportunity because what we're doing is we are selling our products for the very first time, right? The company's not new, they've been around since 1992, but we're selling products for the first time, and that's our Spot robot here over on the left, the yellow quadruped robot. That's what we call it in Boston Dynamics. It's a quadruped, it's not a dog. And what Spot likes to do is, it's a platform upon which people can develop their own solutions. And if you've been following us on YouTube, pay attention next week. We've got some big announcements coming. It's a platform, right, upon which you can build a solution for, you know, interacting with people or interacting with a physical space like a construction site or a power grid or, you know, nuclear reactor, something like that. Anywhere we can put Spot in the way to save a human being, right, from being in harm's way or getting hurt. So a lot of really new, interesting use cases coming out of the whole experience. I'm super excited by it. It's essentially a startup with having, you know, 2 decades worth of R&D into your product. So it's kind of a very unique situation. So enough about that. We're going to talk about the job interview. As an employee, I've been on many job interviews, but as a manager, I've probably interviewed maybe 1,000 people over my career in a number of different capacities. And I wouldn't call myself an expert. I think I have a perspective on things. I'm going to try to share with you a number of ideas as you think about your next job interview, and we'll focus mainly on the technical interview and give you some pointers on things to do when preparing and for conducting your interview. So when you think about a job interview, there's basically 3 goals, right? If I'm your manager, there's 3 things that I'm trying to do with me and my team as we interview you when you visit our company, is we need to determine if you can perform the job well. Right? We're going to have a specification identified about the job, the different types of roles and responsibilities, the things that we're looking to do. We have to try to determine if you can perform the job well. We also want to determine if you can work with the team, right? Are you, you have a good personality? Can you interact well with others? Are you going to bring some strengths or some other characteristics to the role that might help us get better, right? So can we work with you every day? Are you a good teammate? And the third thing is, are you smart? Do you make the team better? Smart meaning we're going to throw problems at you. We're going to throw new technology at you. We're going to train you on things. So are you able to demonstrate an aptitude to learn new things quickly? How are you going to make our team better? When I was at Amazon, and I'll talk about Amazon a little bit later, I was something called a bar raiser. And you know, without getting into too much detail, a bar raiser is a special type of Amazonian that was injected into the interview process to make sure that you, as the candidate, had a very good experience. And because of that, what we're doing, we're called a bar raiser because you are actually going to raise the bar. Were you better than 50% of the people in that role today? And so when we're interviewing you, right, we need to make sure you can perform that job well. Can you work with the team? Right? Are you a good teammate? And then how are you going to make us better? Right? Those are the 3 basic things that we're trying to do in a job interview. Before we get into the technical interview, I just want to take a slide just to talk about a behavioral interview, and just so that we can compare and contrast the 2. A job interview that is a behavioral interview, we're going to focus on questions that dwell on how you acted in a specific situation. Right? We might ask you a question about, tell me about a time when you had to work with a tight deadline, or tell me about a time you had to make a decision when you didn't have all the information in front of you, right? The idea is that, can we get a little bit into, you know, insight into your logic and how you think and how you solve the problem in the past, and how could we, you know, basically relate that to how you might do in the future. So we're probably going to ask you questions that maybe are not exactly what you might do in this job, but they're pretty good, representation of what you might do. The trick to answering a behavioral question is to use the STAR method, right? We want you to tell us about the situation. Want to tell us about the tasks that you had to perform, want to tell us about the action that you took, and then of course, what were the results? And a really good skilled interviewer is really going to help you go through that process. But if they're not skilled at asking you good follow-up questions, right, you need to be prepared for that, right? Think about the STAR, the situation, the task, the action, and the result. So that's really all I'm going to talk about with the behavioral job interview. If anybody's interested in Amazon, they do a lot of this. Most of their interviews are done this way, as are a lot of large companies. But you have to be prepared for this. Talk to me on LinkedIn, find me on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to talk more and more about this with you. But today we're going to talk about the technical interview. Now, the technical interview, right, is something that I really enjoy coming to talk to folks at Bentley about. I'll be honest with you, there's not a lot of companies that go to Bentley University to recruit for engineering talent, right? I always like to tell people the folks that they're going to be recruiting from Bentley are going to be those software engineers. They're going to be their managers, right? You're going to be their managers. And so you are going to likely run into some sort of technical interview. And if you are a software engineer that's back to Bentley, maybe working on an MBA or maybe getting a master's in computer information systems, you need to be, are certainly going to be doing a lot of these types of interviews, right? So just want to be clear that, this is going to be something I think that gives you a little bit of an edge sometimes on other candidates. And it's really going to come down to the way in which you prepare. So the technical interview is different than the behavioral interview because it's focusing on questions or problems that are specific to the role or the job that you're applying for. And they're going to come in various formats. It might be some sort of brain teaser. It might be some sort of numerical reasoning test. You might be writing code, right? A lot of these technical job interviews are really all about writing code. It might be about solving some sort of puzzle. And every company has their spin on how they want to do this. In the last year, when I was interviewing for CIO positions, I had I had many behavioral interviews. I had a technical interview. I had to get up on the whiteboard and draw out how I might build a network for a company that was expanding across the country. I had to draw a network that maybe leveraged the cloud versus hybrid versus on-site servers. So the technical questions could have a variety of different ways in which they're going to be delivered to you. The real key here is again, how are you going to prepare for these things and how are you going to perform when you are in a job interview? The point that I want to make to you today is that the technical interviews are not just about understanding your technical knowledge. It's also going to be about how do you solve a problem, how do you perform under stress, and then how do you leverage your teammates, right? These are all very important things as part of the technical job interview. Now, many of you have probably experienced a number of these types of technical interviewing methods, right? You're going to have an at-home coding challenge, right? They might send you the problem and say, get back to me, by 5 o'clock on Friday with your with your answer. Now, the real key here to an at-home coding challenge, make sure you understand that due date, right? Know that when it's due, and I suggest you get that submitted to them early, right? Don't wait to the last minute and run into a problem and end up being late. Make sure you work very carefully on that. Now, I mentioned here about 2 versions. Now, what I mean by that is I'll tell you a quick story. I had a woman who was an intern for me when I was at Amazon. She was a Bentley master's student. And she had graduated and she was looking for full-time work with Amazon. Now, we didn't have any opportunities for her at Amazon Robotics here in the Boston area, but she was interested in going to New York City. And so she was able to get into an interview with the team in New York City. And she was well prepared. She was an CIS student. She was really strong with SQL. She was doing data analytics. And she went down to the interview and she had a horrible experience. She did terrible. She came back and she was all upset. She's like, I just fell on my face. I don't know what to say. I just cracked under pressure and I couldn't answer the SQL questions and it was just terrible. And I said, well, what did you do about it? She said, well, on the bus ride home, she said, I was really mad at myself and frustrated. I went and I solved the problem. And I said, okay, what do you think you should do with that? She said, well, I'd really like to mail it to the manager. And I said, absolutely, why wouldn't you do that? So she went ahead and did that. She took some time to compose an email, sort of explain that, hey, I just had an off day. I hope you could see that. And I was frustrated last night. I went back home. I solved the problem. I sent it to you. Long story short, she got the job offer. And they said it was because her answer was so good that they welcomed her back for another, another chance to talk. So when I say 2 versions, it might be, if you're stuck in a situation where you are bounded by time, do what you can in that time that you have, and then go back and do it better. Like if you felt like, hey, if I had another couple hours or another day, I'd do it better. There's no harm in submitting that second version. In the case of my friend that had such a bad experience, she was prepared to walk away, and I encouraged her to submit that second version, and that was all it took to get her that conversation again and reopen that process. So something to keep in mind as you do that. The other types of challenges that you're likely to have in your technical interviewing process, you're going to have, a phone screen, and it might just be a trivia challenge. They might ask you some questions about Python or Java or R, whatever it is languages that you're using. It might be a pair programming situation, right, where you're going to sit with another developer. Now, things are a little bit turned on their ear right now with COVID, where we're doing all of these things that we used to do in person, we're now doing them virtually. So in a pair programming situation, instead of sitting in the room with someone and sort of drawing on the whiteboard, right, you're going to be, maybe on a Zoom call like this. Maybe you have a whiteboarding tool that you can use. It might have some other tool that they use for writing code and evaluating. It's going to be something that you would be working on virtually, as if you were in the same room with the person. That might be something, to keep in mind, that if you happen to sort of know that question, sometimes that happens. You prepare yourself really well and say, oh, I know that question. You could do it done and get it done really, really quickly. They're going to ask you, well, that's great. Now make it faster, or now make it better, or what happens if you have 3 inputs instead of 2 inputs, right? Be prepared for that. If you don't know what big O notation is, and you are a software engineer and you're studying for software engineering positions, then I suggest you go and you read about it, right? You probably learned about it in some of your fundamental classes. Big O notation, for those of you that don't know, it's sort of a way of abstracting the performance of a particular algorithm. And it's used a lot in companies, right? Because we want things to go faster and more efficiently. That's really what you need to do when you're getting up in these upper levels of these programming jobs, to be prepared for that, right? So you could expect to see something like that. The last format I talked about, all right, in-person interviews, we talked a little bit about that, right? Now that is a little bit different again virtually. So again, get comfortable with doing these interviews on a virtual platform, right? That's going to be a little bit different. Get someone to practice with you on Zoom, one of your friends or a family member. You also want to think about how you communicate, right? Now, this one's a tough one. If we are working on a problem together, right? And let's say you're interviewing me, right? And there's a whiteboard behind me and you ask me to start to work on code. If I do this, if you're watching my camera, if I do this, right? That's not very engaging for you, right? You're watching the back of my head. I'm not saying anything. We're not having a conversation. Really, what you want to do is something like this. You want to kind of turn, maintain eye contact, right, with your interviewer. You've got the whiteboard here, and we're going to talk about it together. I'm going to talk you through how I'm thinking. In fact, I might even have a conversation with you to say, hey, that's an interesting problem. I'm thinking about solving it this way, A, B, C, D. What do you think? And use it as a conversation. Now, that conversation now shows you that you're a good teammate, right? You're not losing your audience, you're engaging your audience, you're working through the problem together on the whiteboard. They're likely to make it a nice conversation, right? Have fun as you're doing it, talk about it. You might get some hints if you're having trouble on something, but you've really started to establish that relationship with that person. Remember that second rule that I talked about. Are you a good teammate? Is that something that, that they're looking for in you when they go through this interview? Why is the technical interview important? Well, we are evaluating your technical skills after all, right? We need to understand a little bit about how you're go about solving problems. We need to assess how you can think critically, right? Are you thinking about all of the inputs and all of the outputs? Are you thinking about the impact of the decision that you make? Right? Are you considering all of the requirements? Are you asking follow-up and clarifying questions if you don't understand the answer? You have to remember sometimes that the question that's being asked may be vague on purpose, right? I do this as a hiring manager. There's a question that I like to use for my interns all the way up to my senior BSAs. I expect a different type of answer when they do it, but I ask them a question and purposefully is vague. And I will tell you right now that 9 times out of 10, the person does not ask me a clarifying question. And they just go ahead, they think that they're being challenged by the vagueness to answer the question. That's actually wrong, right, is I want you to ask a question. If you're a business analyst, right, your job is to ask the clarifying questions, right? So that's, again, part of that ability to think critically. The last one is, again, evaluating how you work with people. You think, wow, I can write code really, really well. I'm great on the technology. I can write SQL. I can write Python. I'm great at this. But we're evaluating how you work with people. You are not going to sit at your desk in a box for your entire career, right? You're going to interact with people. So you might have great technical skills, and maybe the company, that's all they want. Maybe that's all they want, and that's fine. But more often than not, we're looking at for ways in which you can interface with other people, right? So we want to make sure we get a good feel for that, even during these technical questions. So let's talk about what some of these questions are, right? And I've got some examples here. These are some examples that we used at Amazon, others that I've seen in my own preparation. Thought we could talk about a couple here. It's hard, right? We're not in a room. We can't put it on a whiteboard together, but we can at least talk through it a little bit. So here's an example, right, of a technical programming question that you might get. So given two lists of integers. Now, I've seen this question asked before, and the interviewer, might write a couple of lines on the board for you and hand you the whiteboard marker, and ask you to go up and write the code for that. Generally, it's like what I talked about, right? We're going to have a discussion about what I'm writing on the board. We're going to ask some questions back and forth, and if you answer that question really quickly, they might say, "Can you make it go faster?" Right? What might you do to the content to make it go faster? So these are things that you have to be prepared about when you are working through these types of questions. Another example, right, is a basic numerical analysis question, right? Can you add the numbers 1 to 100 together right now, right? Perfectly reasonable answer might be is you're going to create a for loop, right? 1 to 100, I equals I plus J, right? Just do a typical loop. That's great. There's nothing do that, right? You're manually adding them up 1 through 100. But there's something called a series sum that's better. Now, how would you have known that if you weren't a mathematician? You're right. You probably wouldn't have known that. If you were given this as a homework assignment, right, as a take-home problem, you might want to spend some time Googling to find out, is there a function that can actually solve this? Can I do it faster? Can I do it better? Can I do it more efficiently? Right? These are the things that you want to think about. I'm not saying you need, if how come I don't know a series sum when I'm having a question on a whiteboard in a room with someone? That's okay. This would be more for a time where you might have more time to prepare. If you knew it, that's great. These are the kinds of things that you might see in different types of technical interviews. For those of you that are data analysts in the analytics program, this is a good example for you. You're given a flat file with millions of rows, you load it into a database. What can you do to be reasonably confident that you loaded all millions of rows, right? You can't count them, right? If you took you've had 5 records and you load 5 records and you count all 5, that's great, but you've got millions of rows. What are you going to do there, right? So we're looking at how you would solve that problem. What are some of the things that you would do to ensure that you've loaded the entire flat file, right? I might perform some analysis on the Excel file and then on the database, right? In Excel, I'm going to sum up everything in a column. I'm going to go into SQL and I'm going to sum up the total value of that field. I could count the number of rows, count the columns, right? Different types of things. And, there's probably more answers that you would do here. And there's probably some, you're probably far more sophisticated than I am at doing this. And that's great. They're going to be looking for ways in which you would think about how to solve that problem. You would, if you just said, well, I'm going to count 1,000,000 rows, it loaded 1,000,000 rows, it must be right. Right? That's probably not the answer that's going to get you the job. We're going to want to make sure that you can demonstrate the ability to understand how the things are going to be loaded correctly, right? So again, we're thinking about how you solve that problem. This is one that we use at Amazon, and no, Amazon is not building parking garage systems, but it's a really good software question because it allows the interview candidate to really ask some questions, right? This can be a fairly large, complicated system, so you might want to ask a question like, hey, can we assume that we're only doing credit cards, or we're only doing badge swipes in order to open the gate, or can we assume is there 100 parking spots? Is it on multiple levels, or is it just a big parking lot, right? Those might be some types of questions. Is there a ceiling? Is there a height restriction? So I might have a car come in but can't proceed and has to turn around, like all kinds of questions like that. Now, the assumption is that most of you have driven a car, maybe in the city somewhere, and have had an experience to interact with a parking garage system. If by chance you never have experienced one of these systems, I wouldn't let your interviewer know, right? Let's say you've never driven a car before, and that's okay. I've run into more and more people these days that use ride sharing, right, that aren't going to do this. If you didn't know what this was or understand what it is, you might want to ask for help, right? You're not going to want to fake it. We're going to know you're faking. You might want to ask for help and say, you know, I'm not sure I understand what this is, but I've seen one in a movie and this is how it works. Is that right? Great. Have a conversation about it. You know, you're going to have things around pay. You have things around parking. How do I know how many spots there are? How many available spots? You know, what type of notifications am I going to have, right? If you start to think about this, it now becomes a very complicated system with a bunch of different pieces to it. Can make for a really interesting type of question. And again, when I've seen this used in practice at Amazon, generally what they would do is they would narrow in on one or two specific problems. They weren't necessarily designing the whole thing. The other thing you have to remember is that interview experience that you have, that interview with that manager, with that person, is generally about 45 to 60 minutes long, right? So you can't possibly design this entire thing in all of that time, particularly if they're asking you other questions. So you are constrained by time. You have to think about that as you're answering. This one is usually a fun one that I like to do when we're in the room with everybody. It's funny when I go and ask this question, you know, at a liberal arts college that maybe you saw on one of my slides earlier. I get a lot of like scared looks. And when I go to MIT and ask this question in their analytic department, you know, somebody usually answers it off the top of my head. And I'm going to imagine that some of you know how to do this right off at the top of your head, and some of you are looking at that going, how in the world would I ever be able to do that? But I like to use this as a good example of numeric analysis and estimation. It's a good way to understand how you would think about a problem. So if we make some assumptions here, and we say that Facebook, and let's just say for the sake of argument, has 365 million members, right? They have 365 million members, then we can reasonably assume that about 1 million of those members have a birthday every day, right? 365 days in a year. So there's 1 million birthdays on a day. If we assume that the average person has 100 friends, and 10% of those friends are going to wish you happy birthday, right? So maybe that's 10, and I'm losing track of my math now, I need a whiteboard. It's going to be 10 times 1 million, right? 1 million birthdays, don't hold me to it, but you see where I'm going, right? I'm estimating sort of the total population. I'm trying to segment it in a certain way, and then I'm applying the things that are a little bit easier to understand and a little bit easier to calculate, and then building up a bigger calculation from that. Now, at the end of the day, you know, I think that Facebook has billions of members. You know, use what you know. If you're drawing it on a whiteboard, you might be able to pull out a calculator. You have to do some of this big, you know, big digit math, and that's totally okay too. At the end of the day, really thinking about, you know, how are you going about estimating that problem? How are you working through a problem, asking questions, interacting when you don't know something, acting, how are you acting under pressure sometimes? And this sort of gets to my point around style, right? I've been talking about this a little bit as we go, right? Engaging with the interviewer, making it a conversation. I'm a visual person. I like drawing pictures. I like using the whiteboard. We're going to talk through things. You know, big red flags sometimes if you don't take advice, and I've seen people do this. I've seen people get advice from the interviewer, and they're just like, no, I want to do it myself, right? That's great. Yeah, I guess you're showing initiative in one way, but at the end of the day, you're not taking advice from somebody. That's a red flag, right? The person's not being a team player. So I appreciate the fact that you want to do it yourself and get it right, but if that interviewer is giving you a hint, you better take it, right? They're helping you. They want to see you be successful. We talked about clarifying questions, how it's very important sometimes to ask if you don't understand, you don't know. If you had worked on a problem that was similar to the one that you're being asked, tell them that, right? Because they might say, they might twist the problem a little bit, or if you are having problem with a particular question, you don't really understand what that is, you might say, well, geez, I've never really worked with a parking management system for a parking garage, but I used to work in a supermarket and I understand the deli counter and the tickets and how, and I built a system for that. Is that something that we could talk about? And that might be okay, right? At the end of the day, they're trying to understand your problem solving and understand you as a team member, right? And I made the point in the last slide about being timed. You have to understand that you are being timed. You've got whatever, 30, 45, 60 minutes on an interview with somebody. The interviewer is going to want to manage that time as well. That's a big deal. How do we go about preparing? Well, I put up a couple of my favorite sites that I've used, many that I've talked to my interviewing friends, candidates and managers, what they use. I would, caution you on some of these things where you're posting any of your code samples, and some of them you can post them and get feedback. Beware, right? The feedback that you might get might not be accurate, it might not be correct. So be careful with that. Just again, with a grain of salt, when you're seeking sort of advice from the crowd, just remember and acknowledge where you got that. It's not the hiring manager, it's not the company necessarily that's interviewing you. So be careful about that. I mean, it's a good way to practice. You are not going to be able to practice the questions that you get in the interview unless the company in the interview gives them to you ahead of time, right? That's a whole nother ballgame, right? You've got a lot that you can do there to prepare. In this case, you really don't know what question you're going to get. I would, probably look at Glassdoor. I'd probably look at, Google the company and, the company's interview questions, and you might be able to get feedback from other people that have done it. Glassdoor is an interesting one where people will kind of talk about what to expect. And that's really about the best that you can do, right? You are going to have to be comfortable with thinking on your toes and not being entirely prepared for something. Again, that's part of the whole interview process. Right? Bringing your own laptop with all your tools ready to go. I've talked to a number of software engineers, the managers at Boston Dynamics. I talked to a lot at Amazon, and I asked them the same question. Do you expect people to code in the language that you want, or is it the language that the candidate wants? And in most cases, it's up to the candidate to use the language that they're most comfortable with. So that's a good thing for you, right? You're going to be comfortable with the language that you want. You're going to work it. So have your laptop ready with your tools so that you can log in very quickly, get yourself ready to go in a very fast way. In some cases, they might say, look, we're looking for a Java developer. You need to do the problems in Java. And that's okay, right? That's an expectation that should be made up front. I talked about this a little bit just a moment ago, but again, part of your preparation is learning as much as you can about that company, not just about the company, but about the interviewers. Most interview loops should be given to you with the names of the people who you're going to meet with. If they don't, you got to be a little suspicious there and understand why. Now, maybe you're being hired into a large pool. We don't know who the interviewers are going to be until the day that it happens. I've seen companies do that. Amazon does that when they do some of these interviews on the spot type situations. Most of the time, though, you're going to get a list of people. There's no excuse. Go onto LinkedIn, read about who they are. Guess what? So-and-so went to Bentley. Now you get something to talk about. So-and-so likes, plays golf, or plays the violin, or studied abroad in Italy, right? You've got something in common with him or her. Use these tools to help you prepare. It's not just about writing code all the time, especially with these technical interviews. And again, when you do that, preparing questions, right? They could be technical questions, right? What are the platforms that you use? What freedom do you give your developers, right? Ask these questions, listen attentively, make it a conversation. Okay. So the last topic that I have here is really something that I have only come across very few times in my career. I've sort of taught this, if you will, at a number of these workshops that I've done, and I've received really great feedback from people that have employed these tactics coming up. And it's something that I use myself. I was inspired by a woman who interviewed for an internship for me. It was more than 20 years ago. I'm still friends with her today. And she just did something that I'm going to talk about here in a moment that really changed my perspective about the things that you can do as an interview candidate. And it's going to come out like it's going to be complete common sense for sure. But I think when it's done well, it can really make a big difference for you as a candidate. So I want to share that with you today. So if you were hiring a photographer, right? Or if you were hiring a painter to come and paint your house, or a landscaper to come and design your yard, what would you do? How would you evaluate their talent, right? You could ask them, hey, are you a good photographer? Yes, I'm the best photographer ever. I make really great pictures. I know how to get my subjects, confident and relaxed. I know how to get the sun just right in the background to make that perfect picture. Are you going to take his or her word for it? I hope not. Right? You're going to ask them for their portfolio. You're going to ask them to demonstrate to you. Show me some pictures. For a landscaper or a painter, give me the address of the person where you did work. I'd like to drive by their home and go see it, right? You're going to ask for something that you can physically see, right? And that's what we're going to talk about here as your as you're going through a technical interview. Now, I put portfolio for analytics work. It really could be any work here. It's not just analytics. It could be your code. It could be your projects. If you were interviewing for a project manager role, you might have maybe some generic project templates that you built or project plans that you built. But the idea is that you're going to create a portfolio. Now, a portfolio can take many forms, right? It's really something that you're going to use to provide evidence to your employer, right? Evidence to your interview people. You're going to demonstrate your ability, right? The ability to produce this high quality work. Now, I find it to be a really good complement to your resume. Now, your resume is sort of that summarized, bulleted list of things that that you've completed as part of your work. Now, a portfolio will allow you maybe to take that even further, right? That project plan that you created, that program that you wrote, that dashboard that you built, right? You're going to mention it on your resume, but now your portfolio is going to give you the ability to show it off. Now, portfolio takes many forms, right? You see a picture that I have here. This is how I do it. I use Box. You can use any file sharing system that you like, and I have a collection of PDFs that I put in these folders. And I bring a tablet with me. Now, I could look at it on my mobile phone, but I like to bring a tablet because it is a little bit bigger. Now, the reason why I like my my tablet is because I can log into it very, very quickly, right? I'm not opening my laptop, booting up Windows, trying to get in, booting up Linux, trying to get in and do it. That takes time. If I'm having a conversation with you, I can say, yeah, I built this really great dashboard. Look, here you go. You can see it real quick. That's the kind of interaction that you need to be prepared for. You might not, have access to the internet, so you have to be prepared for that. You might not have, access to dig through a lot of files and so be prepared, right, going in. Now, I will tell you, the story that I told you about the woman who interviewed for me as an intern, 20 some odd years ago, her portfolio was a 3-ring binder. Right, she was, had been a stay-at-home mom for a number of years, had some business experience, went back to graduate school, got a degree in information systems, and she built this really nice 3-ring binder with a lot of her work on there, right? Because she was trying to sell her ability as an IT professional without having any IT experience whatsoever, and her ability to show off her work in a really good way for me as an interviewer, I hired her. I was impressed. I was blown away by it. I had never seen it before. And guess what? I don't ever see it in interviews that I have today. Now, I see candidates come in with a laptop. I see them come in, sort of getting ready. Maybe they were going to show it to me, but they don't do it in a way that makes for a really good experience this way. And I think you have technology at your fingertips today, literally, that you can do a lot of these things. So we talked a little bit about, sort of easing it into the conversation. I will caution you, make sure that, your tablet is charged. You're likely to not have internet access. At least you're not going to have time to get onto the guest network in the building. So have them, on the device directly. Maybe have a printout or two of the real important things that you have that you're trying to make a point, and for some reason, maybe under pressure and you get nervous and you can't find it on the tablet, whip it out, have the paper out, show, have something to show. That's my point about having a plan, having a backup plan, right? So, the trick is, how do you get it into your conversation? I will caution you, right? If you have any work that might be considered, confidential, absolutely redact it, right? I'm not asking you to take trade secrets and go off and show, your trade secrets to a competitor. Absolutely not. We're going to operate under the same, ethics that we've been conditioned to, through our Bentley University education and being respectful and professional. But certainly there are things that you can show. Redact it, right? Redact, names of companies, names of people, anything that might be, identifiable, and keep it basic. If you just need to create a sample that looks like maybe what you worked on, just to as a representative, that's totally fine too. It helps us, again, in that conversation. It helps me as the interviewer visualize exactly what you're referring to. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples from my portfolio to help you understand what I'm talking about here. If you've never used Box, it's a file sharing, cloud-based file sharing app. I will create PDFs, you know, over time. You can see some of the ages on some of these. I'll put them sort of, you know, put my resume, put them in some folders where I can, you know, those names mean something to me. I can go in and find things very quickly. I might have this screen ready to go, opened up on the browser on my tablet, or I may have them, I can use them offline. Box has the ability to use offline. Other things you might use, you know, might be Dropbox or, you know, one of the Microsoft file sharing tools. You know, they can be very useful in this case. This is an example of a strategy document, you know, that I wrote. And, you know, we're not going to sit down and have a conversation about, you know, bullet number 7. This is really about demonstrating how do I take a 3-year plan and boil it down into 1 page, right? Making it, you know, written that a business person could understand, doing it with, you know, some codes, trying to be very effective of my space. I can see very, you know, year 1, year 2, year 3, you know, can be very compelling story as I'm talking about my ability to create an IT strategy and how would I deliver that to business people. This is a really good example to do that. This eye chart is actually a project management methodology. It's something that I sort of wrote with all the things that I liked about all of the methodologies that I experienced when I was sort of an active project manager. I actually teach this in CIS 620. I show this in that class with the folks that we work with, and then I teach this to each of the teams that I go to right now at Boston Dynamics. I'm teaching my team how to use this, and I did it at Athena, I did it at Amazon, and it's, again, it's a lot of common sense. If you're a project manager, you're going to read this and say, oh yeah, this makes a whole lot of sense. But again, it's demonstrating my ability to visualize and explain a very complicated topic, right? That's part of my technical interview process, right? To do that in. Let's see. This one here is a roadmap, right? When you're in IT, you're doing a lot of roadmap planning, right? This is my Gantt chart, if you will, on the right. Over time, it's a very complicated, looks really, really busy, but what it is a list of projects by business area. Who owns them? When are we going to do them? You know, some status reporting on these things, right? Something that, again, helps me demonstrate my ability to visualize something very, very complicated. Again, these are one of my favorites. I do this in every company that I go in and work into. It's just using Visio. I'm kind of mapping out how all of the different systems work together. It becomes a really nice tool that I can then share with people in the business or with people when they join my team. They say, hey, what does our environment look like? I can say, this is what it looks like. I got a couple of these in here. I can go through these a little bit faster here just to give you a feel for them. Okay, so you can see, again, trying to show, you know, some level of roadmap development, some understanding of technology, you know, maybe a demonstration of how the architecture is going to fit together and work together. And a lot of times when I build this is more of a plan, right? This is more of a vision, not necessarily what we built, although we generally come pretty close in how we want to build it. And I like to use, you know, some of these business-friendly terms, right? Someone can look at this and say, oh, okay, this is a truck, and okay, it's transmitting something, and this is a boat and it's transmitting something, or this is a person and, you know, they're looking on their phones. Okay, so we're talking about how we're going to share content, interact with people and things. All right, so for the last few minutes here, I want to talk about, you know, again, what to do to get ready and what happens when they don't go bad here. I usually talk about 2 of these when I do this in person. I'm only going to talk about 1 of them, but again, find me on LinkedIn and remind me of this conversation. I'll be happy to tell you about the other one. But real quickly, I had interviewed, much like you, in my one of my first opportunities in getting a job. We interviewed for a fairly well-known tech company in the Boston area. Thought I was king of the world, right? I had the grades, I had the extracurriculars, thought I was, you know, a shoo-in for this type of job, and it was a software engineering job. And I went in there, and the gentleman proceeded to show me the top of his head because he kept looking down at his paper, and he would write problems on the paper, and he would give them to me and ask me to solve them. And it was a horrible interview experience, right? There was no connection as a team. There was no sort of understanding me as a person. And it was very frustrating for me. And I panicked, and it was horrible, right? Long story short, it was horrible. It was one of those things where you just sort of, like, the vision goes all blurry, and you can't hear anything, and you start sweating, and oh my God, this is just going to be a train wreck. And it was a complete train wreck. And I, you know, was driving home on the Mass Pike back to school after the end of that experience, and I got, you know, about 45 minutes into my ride, and I realized that this was not the kind of company I would ever want to work for. And I just didn't think I had a very good connection, you know, as a person, and how they treated me as a candidate. And once I realized that, I was like, I'm done. It's okay, right? I'm going to learn from this. I'm going to get better. And I suspect you will. If you haven't, you might have a situation like that in the future. And that's why I always recommend to people, you know, when things are going to fail, right? And you know it, when it's going to fail, is you got to stay calm, right? You try and do the absolute best that you can. You're going to take that advice if it's given to you. You're going to ask questions. If it's a big problem, you're going to try to break it down into smaller problems. You're going to change your strategy, right? As a math major, my undergrad, if I couldn't solve it one way, I would find another way to try to solve the problem, right? Same kind of concept is here. If I can't solve it, let's find another way to do it. You know, this last bullet here, ask for an explanation of the answer when it's done. You know what? That's a hard one, right? You're constrained by time. You're not always going to have the time to do that. So that's probably one I would tread lightly with that one. But certainly go home and research the topic, right? I told you about my friend Tracy, who had failed miserably at that interview at Amazon, went back, solved the problem, followed up, had nothing to lose, and look what happened. She got this really great job working in Amazon fashion down in New York City. After the interview, like anything else you do, take a self-assessment. Go back and think about, how did I do? Did I greet the person appropriately? Did I answer the questions clearly? Did I maintain eye contact? Did I feel like I answered the questions appropriately with the right level of information? Was it too detailed? Was it one of the questions that I like to do with people when I interview them is I ask them the first question and I see how long it takes them to pause, right? And I have some people, I have no kidding, I'd ask a question, hey, how's it going? And they go for 25 minutes. And I have a 30-minute interview, right? So know when to pause. Silence is okay, right? I've given my answer. I'm confident that I'm done, and we'll move on to the next topic. Take some notes about your experience, not at your interview, but when you go home, right? Go home, take some notes, think about anything that you might have done wrong, you might want to do better, and then start preparing for that next interview. Last couple slides here, just a summary of sort of lessons learned. Be prepared for anything, right? Also remember that you're interviewing the company and the people as much as they are interviewing you. Take stock of what you see when you walk in that building. What do you hear? Do you hear people laughing? Are people standing around? Do they have smiles on their face? How are they dressed? Are they wearing a suit and tie? Are they wearing jeans and a polo shirt? Are they dressed casually? Are they dressed formally? All of these things, right? You're interviewing them as much as they are interviewing you. And if things don't go well, forget about it, right? Learn from what you can, make of it what you can, and then move on, okay? The tech portfolio, I think, is one of those ways that are going to help you stand out, right? You're not going to see a lot of people doing this, okay? And then we talked about it. If it really didn't go as planned, you want to follow up afterwards, I don't think it's a problem to do that. One of the number one complaints that I get from my teams when we interview people, smile, make eye contact, right? The virtual interviews, that's going to be a problem, right? That's going to be a problem for people because if I sit here and I lecture to my room, I'm not looking at the camera. That doesn't create a good. So I take a picture of your favorite friend and stick it on your laptop right next to your camera, and that way you're looking at that person and you're having a good eye contact. That's a good tip on virtual interviews as well. Everything that you're being asked to do is being asked for a reason. All right. So even if you think, wow, that's kind of weird, go along with it. Right? They're probably asking you for a reason. And if you don't know something, just tell them. Right? Tell them. Maybe they'll give you a different question. Maybe they will give you some hints. Okay. We talked about all of these here. I'm going to fly through this. Amazon bar raiser, you want to learn more about that, or if you're interviewing at Amazon, I know they're a big company, find me on LinkedIn. Be happy to go through that with you. All right. I promised Anna I would try to be done with some time left for questions. I saw a few coming in. Wanted to make sure I kept her on time.
Yes, thank you so much, Chad. That was wonderful. You covered, I think, the whole gamut of technical interviewing, which is absolutely amazing. So thank you. And yes, we did have a few questions come in. So I'm going to start at the top because it's most upvoted. So we have an attendee who wants to know, how long should one prepare for a technical interview? You know, is it true that for Amazon, people would prepare for a month?
Yep.
And then specific for technical interviewing, is there a guidebook to follow?
Sure. Great question. How long should you prepare? You're probably preparing your whole life, right? It's sort of like the SATs, right? You can cram in, studying at the last few hours, but it's, again, these questions are about how you solve problems, how you deal with stress, how you deal with change, how you deal with ambiguity. It's going to be all about you. How long should you do? look, you're probably going to know about an interview with maybe a week's notice, right? Maybe less than that. So, use your time wisely. I don't know if I could put a number on it. It's probably, a few hours, maybe researching the company, understanding who you're going to meet with, maybe do some research on what types of problems that they ask, find somebody in your network that works there and maybe ask them. So you probably, what is that? 4, 6, 8 hours over a couple of days, maybe, to get ready. There's no guidebook, right? That's the thing. You might want to create a notebook for yourself. I do it in Evernote, and I put notes in there of questions that I find and answers that I have, and think about your resume. Sit down one day and kind of do the STAR method for the different types of technical problems that you've solved, and kind of write that out for yourself. And then you can refresh that maybe the night before.
Great. Thank you. And on that same sort of note, I know we saw the slide with all of the tools that are out there to prepare for technical interviews. So our attendees want to know, what is your strategy to approach the preparation in terms of, which tools you decide to use? Are you more selective? Do you kind of run through all of them, or how's that selection process go?
Yeah, I would say it's far more selective. I think it's going to be what you're comfortable with. I mean, the tools are meant to help anyone prepare and or improve their coding skills, right? At least most of them out there. And I think that's going to be unique for everybody. There might be some people that don't want to use those tools, and that's okay too. They are available, right? And so my point was to just kind of show them to you. I think it really is personal preference on a case-by-case basis on what you feel most comfortable with.
Great. Thank you. Oh, yes, the questions are really coming in now.
That's okay. That's okay. I have plenty of time.
So one of our students wants to know, what is a better position other than software engineering for CIS people who are not great at coding?
Okay. All right, great question. I get this question a lot. I want you, whoever asked and is interested in that question, I want you to go back after our call today and go on to your favorite job site, Indeed or Glassdoor or LinkedIn, and I want you to search for business analyst, right, or business systems analyst. And you're going to see lots and lots of job opportunities for that role. You're going to see very big differences in what companies are looking for when they say business analyst. Now, at a high level, my experience as a business analyst and what I hire as a business analyst is someone that can understand the business, can interact with the business people, and that understand technology. They may not be the ones that are writing the code. That's probably going to be something that you'll hand over, maybe in the form of a written specification, to a developer. Right? So the business analyst, I think, is a great opportunity for those of you in the Bentley CIS program or any of the graduate programs that are not software engineers. And I get worked up about this question sometimes because, and I struggle, I have a daughter who's in college and she's on a path of doing data analytics. And that's another great one, by the way. Does require a little more coding. But people think that if I'm going to work in IT, all I'm going to do is write code. I haven't written code in, I don't know, years, right? But I have to understand it, and I have to understand how it works. I don't know the Java syntax anymore. I wrote Java programs a long time ago. SQL is a good one, right? That is, it's not hard code development, but you do need to understand data and data development. If you have taken a SQL course, great. That's a great experience to have because every company has data and they need people that understand data. And if you've done some Python, then you understand how scripting works. And if you've never done Python, that's okay. Maybe read an article or maybe get some exposure to it at some point. Doesn't mean you're going to be writing scripting all the time, but you might have to work with developers who are writing scripts. And so being prepared and understanding that way as a business analyst makes you a lot better in that role.
Perfect. Thank you. We have an attendee who is interested for your latest position as CIO at Boston Dynamics. What did you do specifically to prepare for the technical component of your interview?
Great question. Okay, so this is what I did. I made the assumption that with my role, I was going to be asked a lot of behavioral interviews. Right, so I did not expect to be asked, to write any code, and I made that assumption based on a couple of things. Right, studying the job description very carefully, I also talked to some people that work there. I had a friend who was a former coworker and friend who worked in their HR, ran their HR department. So I kind of did my sort of backdoor investigations, just like I would expect you to do on companies that you go to interview with. And so I focused on what I thought was going to be more of a behavioral interview. Now, what I did was I thought about all of the very challenging technical problems that I've solved over my experience, and I wrote out sort of the STAR method for them. Now, how is this preparing for technical? Well, when I walked into the interview, person asked me to design a computer network, and I was completely unprepared. In fact, I think it was a horrible answer, and I was surprised that they hired me, quite honestly. But I talked with the gentleman. He actually reports to me. It was the IT manager at the company, and we laughed about it afterwards. And he's like, no, you design it. He goes, that was his question that he likes to tell everybody. And I think in retrospect, right, I would have probably, thought a little bit more about the types of technology questions that the company would be facing in their growth. The question that he asked me made a whole lot of sense, right? They're growing and expanding. How would I design a network to do that? But with that said, I think, finding out as much as you can about that company, and then sort of, you have limited amount of time, right? We talked about how much time would it take. You have a limited amount of time, and so you need to really prioritize.
Great, thank you. And on that same note, in terms of, the tech interview questions for a managerial position, how might that differ from an associate role? I think you covered a little bit of that.
Yeah, I think more in the associate roles, it's like you're really going to have to have a good understanding of of the technology. Let's use SQL as an example, right? And if you're hiring for an SQL role, they're likely not to expect you to be a SQL expert, right? You need to know what it is, probably need to be able to write some SQL on the board, with a question and sort of answer some basic, table manipulation questions, writing queries, things like that. As you become more and more of a manager, it might be, your questions might shift a little bit, right? Might be about, how do you deal with your customers that don't understand how to use the technology? Or how do you deal with your employees that aren't able to write good queries, right? So it might be sort of changing the context a little bit, but still focused around that. Now, depending on the role, you might be asked to do some senior level SQL queries, and that, again, every company is going to have a little bit different criteria.
Perfect. Thank you. I know we talked a lot about portfolios during this webinar too. So I have a student here who just would like to know, is it okay to include group projects in the portfolio?
Great question. Yes, I would absolutely encourage you to include a group project, but be very clear about what work that you did. How did you contribute to that group? There is nothing wrong with showing a group project. I would just be very clear on what your contribution was. When I was a manager at Amazon, as a bar raiser, so I observed interviews and I participated in interviews, and I would ask people, how do you work on, tell me about a project that you worked on. People fall generally into two camps. They're going to be in the we camp. We did this, we did that, right? Because they think I'm a team player. So we did this together. And there are people that fall in the other camp that say, I did this, I did that. And you might think, I'd never say I. That's egotistical and narcissistic. I'm not going to say I did this. I'm going to say that we did this. I strongly recommend you to get comfortable with talking about yourself and saying I did this. Because in those Amazon interviews, I get people that would say we, and I'd have to stop them and say, what was your contribution? What did you do? And a lot of times they didn't have a good answer. So be prepared for that. I think there's nothing wrong with saying we did this because it was a team effort, but my contribution, what I did was exactly this.
Great. Oh, that's some great insight. Because I know even in our coaching conversations, students really struggle between that we and that I.
Yeah.
So being prepared and almost reframing that I isn't that egotistical thing. It's really
I agree.
showing.
And I do the same thing. I'm all about the team as well, and we're in this together. And right, and it's like at this point, you know what? They're interviewing you and hiring you, not the team. You have to get comfortable with saying I did this, and be able to back it up. Right? If you say I did this, you might need to be able to demonstrate that. So be prepared.
Great. Thank you. And I think the last question that we are going to have time to ask today is some folks are interested in what is the hiring landscape like for Boston Dynamics this summer? Has COVID maybe changed the hiring landscape? Are you still looking for particular roles?
Yeah. I encourage you to check out bostondynamics.com. I will say, like just about every company, we were impacted, and I would say in a way that we just slowed down a little bit. We didn't stop. We are a privately funded company. We're owned by SoftBank. With that said, though, right, I mean, the hiring plan that we had was pulled back a little bit. We still are actively hiring, particularly in the key roles, and we're just continuing to grow, right, and that's happening. I have lots of friends at Amazon. For those of you that are interested in any part of Amazon, web services, Alexa, you know, retail, whatever, they're hiring like crazy, right? I mean, and because the COVID has impacted their business a little bit differently. So if you're interested in Amazon, I'm happy to, you know, make an introduction for you. Find me on LinkedIn. You have my LinkedIn profile there. Boston Dynamics, though, is really usually senior level roboticists. So if unless you're a PhD roboticist going back to get your MBA, I will say on the technical side, the requirements are very, very high. However, we are, you know, building out sales and general administrative functions, finance, IT, legal, right? Keep an eye on the website. If you see something that's interesting to you, reach out to me. And I always recommend, remind me of this conversation. And that can be a good trigger for me to make sure I get you a quick response.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Chad. That presentation was absolutely fantastic. I think all of us today learned a lot about the technical interview and knowing, you know, its many components and strategies and how to prepare. So we just want to say thank you. We've enjoyed having you here. And everyone, Chad mentioned, if you're looking to get in touch with him, you know, please view his LinkedIn, and always remember to send a personalized invitation, like you said, and, you know, remind him where you met him.
Yep.
But otherwise, I hope everyone has a great day, and thank you again very much, Chad. I see some people in the chat actually saying thank you very much to you as well. So,
all right. Well, you're all very welcome. Happy to help.
All right. Bye, everyone. Take care.